Masechet Yevamot Tafkof Dalid. We begin with the Mishnah. Chalsa balayla chalisata keshera v'Rabbi Elazar posel. If someone performs chalisa at night, then according to Tanakama, that's fine, it's valid. But Rabbi Elazar says no good. We'll see the reason for the machloket. Bismol chalisata pisula v'Rabbi Elazar machshir. If she takes off the man's left shoe, the shoe that's on his left foot, then it's no good according to Tanakama, but Rabbi Elazar says it's okay. So they actually switch opinions. Tanakama is mekel in the first case at night, but machmir in regarding a left shoe, and Rabbi Elazar is the opposite. Okay, lema behakami palge demor sabar makshinan ribin lingaim umor sabar lo makshinan ribin lingaim. Both opinions agree that the best thing is to perform chalitza during the day. Generally, if you go to Beit Din meets during the day. So what would be the reason, the essence of the machloket regarding nighttime? Maybe they're arguing on the following point. Rabbi Elazar, who prohibits nighttime, he says we make a comparison between monetary matters. We're considering chalitza to be here a monetary matter, even though before we said it's also a matter of isur, because she's permitted or prohibited from marrying someone based on chalitza. But it also has a monetary aspect in that once you do chalitza, then her ketubah needs to be paid. So therefore, we do compare monetary cases to cases of negaim, sarat. So we know regarding sarat that when the Kohen comes and checks it has to be checked during the day, which makes sense because you have to examine exactly the color and the hair and all that, and you have to do it during daylight when you can actually see. So since we compare them, just like sarat has to be examined during the day, so too monetary cases have to be heard by a Beit Din during the day, and therefore chalitza is only good during the day, and that explains Rabbi Elazar. Whereas Tanakama says, no, we don't make a connection between monetary cases and negaim, and monetary cases can in fact be heard at night. We're about to see the Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin actually says that regarding monetary cases, they have to be heard beginning during the day, but if they extend into the nighttime, then that's fine. So here too, if you would do it during the night, then that would be fine. It's not the same as the Negaim, where it has to be seen during the day only. Okay, so that is the proposal. And then we say, not necessarily. We'd rather not box in the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar into having to assume something else about monetary cases. In fact, we can assume that both opinions do not make a connection between monetary cases and sarat. Sarat is only during the day. Monetary cases may very well be at night also. Since that is actually the Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, we'd prefer if everyone could agree to that. Because if you are going to make that connection between sarat and monetary cases, then regarding monetary cases, you would not even be able to finish the verdict at night. And the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin that you can, as long as you start the case during the day, hearing the case, you can give the final verdict at night. So we can assume, everyone does agree to that and it's not connected to sarat. So what is the point of the machloket? Mor sabar chalisa ke tchilat din damya, mor sabar chalisa kigmar din damya. Rabbi Elazar, who says prohibited, would say that we're doing chalitza is like the beginning of judgment. And everyone agrees that when you begin a monetary case, any case has to be begun during the day. And so the beginning of chalitza is the beginning of a process. Eventually, after the chalitza, then she'll come and say, oh, now can you pay my ketuvah? But that's later. Whereas the other Tanakama says, chalitza is like the final verdict, right? This is the act that will separate them and automatically make him responsible for paying the ketubah. So this is actually more similar to a final judgment, and the final judgment can be at night, and therefore they say chalitza can be at night. All right, now that we understand this machloket, we have a story. Rabba bar Chaya ketosfa'a avad obada bemok ubechidi ubalayla. So this Rabba bar Chaya, who comes from Ctesiphon, which is really interesting. Ctesiphon was the capital of the Persian Empire, the Sasanian dynasty in Babel. So that's interesting that he lived in the capital city. Mehoza is a suburb of that city. Sages like Rava are from Mehoza. That's right outside Tesifon, part of it. Okay. Anyway, in his place, one time he did a chalitza, and he used a muk, meaning a slipper made out of cloth, not made out of leather. Bichidi, and he did it in private, meaning by himself, without three judges. Ubalayla, and he did it at night. So that's why it relates to what we just said. He did it at night, even though we just said this is a machloket. Amar Shemuel, and Shemuel heard that. He said, Kama Rab Gubre da'aved ki yichada. He says, wow, how great is the power of this master that he follows an individual opinion. All right, so he's saying, it's saying kind of like a praise that he must be so great that he knows how to, that he can decide a halacha as an individual opinion. But it's also a subtle criticism, meaning he should not have done that. This is not proper. He should follow the majority opinion. Okay, so my kashya, what exactly was he asking? Which of these three, or all of them, are a minority opinion? Muk sitamatanya. We saw Braita beforehand that muk, the stam Baraita, the anonymous opinion in the Braita, says that you can use a muk. It's made out of felt, hard material, so it offers some protection. That's fine. Even though it's subject to machloket, he can follow the anonymous opinion, so that's fine. If you're talking about nighttime, our Mishnah just said that according to Tanakama, you can perform chalitza at night. So he has what to rely on. So what? Rabbi Elazar disagrees. You don't have to follow his minority opinion. You can follow the majority and do that. So he wasn't criticizing him about that. Rather, his problem is that he did it alone without a betin, and that is only a minority opinion that says you can do that. There's two singulars here, right? He did it individually as the only judge, and that there's only a single opinion that says you're permitted to use a single judge. Here we have Mishnah that's going to come up later. On Amud Bet right now. Chalsa bishnayim o bishlosha v'nimsa echad mehen karov o pasul. Someone did chalisa with only two people, not three required as a betin, but only two. Or let's say there were three there, but it turns out that one of them is a relative or a gambler and is an invalid judge, and therefore, since now you're back to two in that case, so either way, there's only two valid judges. Halisata pisula, it's no good. That's Tanakama. So you see, that's the majority opinion. These other two sages say it's okay if you have two. And we have yet a third opinion, and we know this from a story, a case where someone did chalisat to his wife while in jail. So these were, I guess, extenuating circumstances. For some reason, they were both in jail and together, and there's no one else around to come and be the judges, and they did it. And B'diavad came before Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says it's okay, meaning even just privately, if one does chalitza, that is fine. That's no judge there at all. Okay, so the first two opinions at least needed two people. Rabbi Akiva says not even that. So here we have this Rabbah Bar Chiya who did it individually. He was following a minority opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and that's why Shemuel says, oh, he must be so great that he can follow a minority opinion. Good. Amar Rav Yosef bar ben Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman, en halacha keoto hazug. And we have a statement that says we do not follow the pair, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan HaKablar. And so who say you need, they say you don't need a betin. But anyway, halacha is not like them. So you see, he's following only Rabbi Akiva, who permitted it. And so that's why Shemuel said what he said. Okay, all that is one version. Another version says, actually, Shemuel was commenting on all three aspects of what that sage did. Not only the doing it at night, but he was commenting that Rabbah Bar Chiya, Ketosfa'a, all three of these are a minority opinion. And why would he say that? Because the Tanya, we have a Braita, Amar Rabbi Shishmael Rabbi Yosef. Ani re'iti et Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha shehalas b'muk bichidi ubalayla. There's two Rabbi Yishmaels. One is Rabbi Yosef says he saw Bishma ben Elisha who did exactly that. He used this slipper not made out of leather, and he did it in private, and he did it at night. And the fact that he is commenting on it sounds like, oh, he did this according to only that one opinion. Who permits it, but the majority of sages would not permit it. So according to this version, Shema was commenting on all three. All right, so that's the discussion about the nighttime. And now the next part of the Mishnah says, Bismol hasila chali sata. If you do it with the left foot, then it's invalid according to Tanakama. Rabbi Elazar says it's okay. My tamad Rabbanan, how come Rabbanan say it's invalid using a left shoe on a left foot? Beforehand, we saw that if you put a left shoe on the right foot, then that is okay, b'di avad. But here is a shoe on the left foot that she removes from his left foot, and that's no good. Amar ula yalfinan regel mi mesora malelan deyamin afkan deyamin. Regarding a mesora, we're comparing this also to mesora. It says regel. In order to purify a mesorah, you have to have blood applied to his right big toe. So it has to be on his right foot. Then we learned that's the pasuk that says regel regarding mesorah. So Ula says, yes, we compare regel regarding mesorah to regel that it says regarding chalitza. And so just like regarding mesorah has to be his right foot only, so too chalitza has to be his right foot only, and that's why Tanakama says it's no good. All right, but Rabbi Elazar lo yalif regel mesorah. Rabbi Elazar says it's okay if you use the left foot. Well, he doesn't have this gezerah shava of regel, it has to be the right foot. Vatanya Rabbi Elazar omer minayin l'rsi'a shehi be'ozen haymanit shene'emar kan ozen v'ne'emar lan ozen ma lan yamin afkan yamin. Rabbi Elazar himself does make a similar gezerah shava regarding boring a hole in an eved, the ear of an eved ivri, and that has to be if he wants to stay past the 6 years. He says, "I love my master, I want to stay." Then we pierce his ear, and it has to be his right ear. How do you know it has to be his right ear? Because regarding piercing the servant's ear, it says ozen. And regarding the mesorah, again, it says ozen. You apply the blood not only to his right toe, but also to his right ear. And has to be his right ear. Malan yamin afkan yamin. So you see, Rabbi Elazar makes a gezerah shava just like this from mesorah to another case. So it makes sense that he would also agree to the gezerah shava with regel from mesorah to chalitza, and therefore he should agree with Tanakama that if you put it on the left, if you use the left foot, then chalitza should be no good. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mukhlefet Hashita. Rabbi Yochanan says, you're right, that's a good argument, and therefore, you know what, we should switch the two opinions in our Mishnah. And actually, Rabbi Elazar would be the one to say on the left foot is no good, and Tanakama would say it's fine, which is really interesting, because if you switch the opinions, then Tanakama in both cases, at night and left foot, would be lenient, and Rabbi Elazar would be stringent in both cases. So then they would, be more consistent. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yochanan, who is an early Amorah, and often has comments on the version of the Mishnah, which he learned directly. So he has that authority to say that. Okay, that's one answer. But Rava, who's much later, Amorah in Bavel, the 4th generation, says, the olam lo tepoch. No, you don't have to switch around the opinions. Ozen mufne, regel lo mufne. Regarding ozen, which Rabbi Elazar accepts that it has to use the right ear for mesorah, and therefore also for the servant. In that case, the word ozen is extra. It's not needed for its context. So that is a solid gezerah shava. Whereas regarding regel, we need the word regel and for the yavam to know that you have to take the shoe off of his foot. Remember how many things we learned from the word regel, right? Or foot, not an inverted foot, not above, not below. So that we need that for context, and therefore you cannot use it for a gezer hashava. Well, hold on. The rule is that even if a word is needed for its context, you can still make a gezer hashava as long as there's nothing wrong with the gezer hashava. See, there's not just a word comparison. If you look at gezer hashavot, especially the earlier ones, actually also a conceptual comparison. So, and the word is just helping out the conceptual comparison. So, therefore, if the concepts are equivalent, then even if the words are not extra, you can make the gezer hashava. You only need the words to be extra if there's a problem conceptually that one of the cases has some aspect that's different from the other. If so, then and the words are extra, then the gezerah can still apply. So here you said, oh fine, the word regel is not extra, I need it for the context, but nevertheless I can still make a gezerah shava, and it will still be okay, unless there's something wrong with it. So what is the problem that I would not be able to make a gezerah shava unless the word was extra? A misorah, you see, is much more involved. You have to get a cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet thread, right, and use all these ingredients. And there's nothing like that regarding chalitza. And so you might say, oh, I need a very particular about putting it on the right toe for the mesorah, because look how many other things are very particular regarding mesorah, but that is different from chalitza, where you don't have all these particular details. And so that's why Rabbi Elazar would not make that gezer hashava, and therefore he is actually the one who is lenient regarding using the left foot. All right, that's that Mishnah, and now we get to the next one. So we know that ideally you have to do three things in the chalitza process. You have to read some pesukim, and she has to take off his shoe, and she has to spit. She doesn't spit at him. It doesn't, not in his face. She spits in his presence, towards him. Okay, so ideally you need all three things. But what if you're missing any one of them? Is it okay? So if she does this, she takes off his shoe, and she also does the spitting, but she didn't read the pesukim. She didn't have the conversation and said, this my brother-in-law does not want to do yibum, and all that. Then the chalitza is still kosher because she did the actions. Everyone agrees. If she read the pesukim and she spit, but she did not take off the shoe, then that's no good. Taking off the shoe, that's called chalitza, taking off the shoe. So then that is nothing. What if she did take off the shoe and she read the pesukim, but she didn't do the spitting? That's machloket. Rabbi Elazar omer chalisata pesula. Rabbi Akiva omer chalisata keshera. Rabbi Elazar is stringent, no good. Rabbi Akiva, we're going to see, Rabbi Akiva is lenient in a number of things. He says that's okay if she skipped the spitting ceremony. Now we have in the Mishnah itself, we have a conversation between these two sages for their derivations and reasons why. Amar Rabbi Elazar, kacha ye'aseh kol davar shu maseh me'akeb. In the parasha of Chalisa he says kacha ye'aseh la'ish shedivno bet achiv. This is what you should do to someone who does not build his brother's house. Since the pasuk says this is what shall be done, it means the actions are necessary. The words that she should recite them, but if she doesn't, that's not as important as the actions. And so therefore, Rabbi Elazar says it's okay if she doesn't read it, but you must have the shoe taken off, and you must do the spitting. If you don't do the spitting, then the chalitza is not valid. Amar Rabbi Akiva misham re'aya kacha ye'aseh la'ish kol davar shu ma'aseh be'ish. Rabbi Akiva says, don't take those two words out of context. And look at the next word. This is what shall be done to the man, meaning only actions that are done to the man himself, those are absolutely necessary. That means removing the shoe. But the spitting, even though the spitting is done in his presence, the spit does not touch him, does not reach him. It's just she is spitting that's independent of the man's own body. So therefore, only the halisa is necessary. whereas the others are, if you don't do them, it's still valid. Okay, good. Hacheresh, Mishnah continues, shenechelas, ve'achareshet shechalsa, ve'choleset lekatan halisata pesula. Someone who's deaf, man, and he had chalitza, she took off his shoe, or she's deaf and she took off the shoe, or the man is a minor. And someone could die without children and has a younger brother who's a minor, and she takes off his shoe. In these three cases, the chalitza is not valid. The Gemara will discuss why. Bez is going to conclude that they do not have mental capacity to do this ceremony. Ketana shechalsa tahalos mishetagdil v'imlo chalsa chalisata pesula. If she is a minor and does chalitza to an adult, then she has to do chalitza again when she gets older. If she does not do chalitza again, then that one that she did as a minor is not valid. Again, I will discuss tomorrow why this is not included in the first three, since they're all pisula. Why not say the same language? What does that mean? Do it again when you're older. Chalsa bishnayim o bishlosha v'nimsa echad mehen karov o pasul halisata pesula. If someone had only two people there, only two judges, or three, but one of them ended up being a relative, turned out he was a relative or was an invalid judge, then the chalitza is no good. We saw this. We quoted this Mishnah already on Amud Aleph. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yochanan Sandan Machshirin. Rabbi Shimon Yochanan said that's fine if you have two people there. I guess Katan are not as judges, more like as witnesses. That's sufficient. And then this case that happened in jail where there was nobody else there, only the man and the woman. It was done privately, and yet Rabbi Akiva said, okay, so that's a three-way machloket. All right, and regarding the first case up here, Amar Rava, Hashta damart kiri'a lo mi'akeba, lefichach ilem v'ilemet shechasu halisatan keshera. Rava is commenting on the fact that we said up here, if someone does not read the Pesukim, and they only do the other two things, take off the shoe and they spit, but they don't read the Pesukim, everyone agreed that it's fine. It's still valid. So now that you said that reading is not absolutely necessary, therefore, someone who is cannot speak, a mute, if he is mute or if she is mute and they did chalitza, it should be fine, which really makes logical sense since you don't have to say the Pesukim. So if you cannot speak, so what? There should be no reason not to be able to do chalitza. The problem is that then there's a contradiction with the second part of the Mishnah. Tenan charesh shenechalas vechareshet shechalsa vecholeset min hakatan chalisata pesula. My tama lav mishum dela bene kiriya ninhu. The second half of the Mishnah says that someone who's deaf who does chalitza, or if the man is deaf or if the woman is deaf and they do chalitza, or the man is a minor, then the chalitza is no good. Isn't the reason because they cannot read, right? The deaf person cannot read, cannot speak, and that's why it's no good. So now this doesn't make sense, but we just said that you don't have to say the Pesukim, and it's still valid if you don't say the Pesukim. So why is it important that the person, so how come the Mishnah says a deaf person cannot do it? So we answer, La mishum de la bene de'a ninhu. No, these cases in the Sefer of the Mishnah are all cases where the person is not mentally competent. In those days, deaf people, they didn't know how to educate them. They didn't know sign language and all that. And so deaf people were not fully mentally present, similar to a child, would not be responsible and therefore does not have enough intention in order to perform the chalitza. So that's why, all right, if so, in that case, a mute person also should say the same thing. Maybe they also don't have the mental capacity. No, someone who can't speak, he can hear, but he can't speak. That's not that doesn't affect their mental capacity. It's like if someone's mouth hurts, right? So you can't talk, you can't open your mouth, you can't pronounce things. So that person is totally mentally competent. He just has something wrong with his mouth. The same thing. A mute, just he can't speak for whatever reason, but he can hear and he can learn, he can understand. So there's a difference between a mute, for whom that's totally fine, since you don't have to read it, so it's permitted, as opposed to someone who's deaf, who also can't speak, even though he doesn't have to speak, but he has to have the intellectual capacity. And that's how we explain our Mishnah. So Rava actually makes perfect sense, but we're still going to reject it because we have another statement. Rabbi Anai explained our Mishnah, saying that a deaf mute cannot do chalitza because they cannot speak. And it says he has to speak and she has to speak. They have to say their lines. They can't say their lines, and therefore it's not only because they deaf mute is mentally incapacitated. It's also because they can't speak, and therefore someone who's just a mute also would not be able to do chalitza. So therefore, so we have to reword what Rava said, because Rava cannot. We don't want Rava to go against this authoritative statement from Rabbi Yanai. So instead, Asefa Itmar, we're going to change Rava to actually say the opposite of what the first version, and applying it to the second part of the Mishnah. This is quoting the second half of the Mishnah that said if he's deaf or if she's deaf, or a child, if he's a child, then the chalitza is no good. On that, Amar Rava, hashtad amat kiriya me'akeva, lefichach ilem ve'ilem shechasu chalisata pesula. Now that you told me that reading is necessary, where do you see that? Because a deaf person can't do it. So now we're assuming, like Rabbi Yanai, that the reason why a deaf person cannot do chalitza is because he can't read. He can't say the words out loud. And so now that you said that, Rava says, therefore, not only a deaf person, even if someone who can hear but is mute, also his chalitza will not be valid. So it's the opposite of what Rava said before. Okay, now we're going to still have to explain what if the first half of the Mishnah said you don't have to read. Right? If you didn't read b'diavad, that's okay. So now why are you telling me that a mute is no good? He has mental capacity. He just can't read. But you just told me if you don't read, it's fine. So then, what's the reason why a mute person cannot do chalitza? Umatnitin ke Rabbi Zera. Damar Rabbi Zera. Kol ra'ui lebila en bila me'akebet bo. Roshen ra'ui bila me'akebet. We have a principle that's applied in many places in the Talmud, that comes from a rule about a mincha offering. Mincha offering is made out of flour mixed with oil. And so generally you would mix them together. The thing is, you don't actually have to mix them together. You just have to be a potential that you can mix them together. So therefore, any vessel that is big enough that you can mix them together, you don't actually have to mix them together. As long as it's in a vessel that that can hold enough that you could mix it properly, then you don't actually have to mix it, and it's valid. Whereas if it's in a vessel that's too small that you could not possibly even mix it, then it's no good. Because then in that case it has to actually be mixed, and you can't mix it in there. So this is the case. This is the principle of Rabbi Zera, that you have to have the potential to do something in order to be valid, even if you don't actually do it. So we apply that here also. The person doing chalitza has to have the potential to recite the pisukim out loud. Therefore, a mute cannot do it. However, if someone can speak, then even if they don't say the pisukim, it's still okay. So it has to be a person, just like it has to be a vessel that's big enough that you could mix the flour and oil. So too, chalitza has to be done by a person who could potentially say the words. Even if they don't say the words, that's still okay. All right, that makes sense. Shalchu le lavu dishmoel Yevamot sherekecha tachalos. Okay, now a new thing. We said in the Mishnah that if someone does spits only, but does not take off the shoe, then that is invalid according to everyone. But now we're going to see yet another opinion that comes from Eretz Yisrael. They sent some sages sent a message to the father of Shemuel. Said if a Yevamot does the spitting only, then she has to follow up with chalitza. In other words, she cannot go and marry one of the brothers. Miklal pasela la me'achin. So spitting only does not perform a full yibum, perform a full chalitza, to the extent that she can go and marry someone else. But once she does the spitting, then that prevents her from doing yibum with any of the brothers. So we see here that the spitting actually is somewhat effective. Okay, so now who is the author? We're going to try 3 different possibilities. We're rejecting the first 2, and we'll see it can be the opinion of Rabbi. So maneh. Ilema Rabbi Akiva, is it Rabbi Akiva? Hashta, Uma bimkom mitzvah, dikal memar midi dehava emurim, dechiletnehu lo me'akebe, vechitnehu me'akebe, amar Rabbi lo me'akeba, me'achin ipasla. Okay, so this is actually a very simple argument. It says, according to Rabbi Akiva, he's the one that said that if you spitting is not even required. If you do just chalitza, he's the one that was most lenient in the Mishnah. He said if you just do chalitza and no spitting at all, it's fine. So you see that he doesn't think spitting is very important. So it can't be Rabbi Akiva, because if he says that in the place of a mitzvah, when you're actually doing the mitzvah, and he did chalitza, then you don't even need spitting. I'll skip to the end. Lo me'akeva. So then it should be nothing. Me'achili pasela. Would he say that spitting only would make her disqualified? You don't even need spitting when you're doing the full ceremony. So if you did only the spitting without the shoe ceremony, he would not say that that's necessary. Okay, I'm going to fill in. Now we're comparing it all to another case of emurim. That's the innards of a sacrifice that is eaten by the kohanim. Part of it, the blood has to be sprinkled. Part of it is put on the mizbeach, and then the kohanim can eat from it. And the law is that first you have to put the blood in the mizbeach and the fat parts that are burnt on the mizbeach. First, you have to put those on, and only when that is finished, then the Kohanim can go and eat from it. However, the thing is regarding that when if the fatty parts are there, then you have to do that first. But let's say the parts that are supposed to be sacrificed get lost or stolen. Get on there, they're not around. So then what are you going to do? We can't put them on the mizbeach. The halacha is that the chiletnehu, when they're not available, then they do not prevent the Kohanim from eating. Since they're not there, so fine. But when they are there, then they do prevent. You can't eat the rest of the sacrifice Kohanim until you put the fatty parts on there. So if we had that as a parallel to this case, the parallel is that here, if you do the chalisa and there is any possibility that you can do the spitting, then you need to do it. And yet Rabbi Akiva does not even say that. He says you do chalitza, and even if you could spit and you don't, that's totally fine. So he's even more lenient than the case of emurim. In the case of emurim, only if it's not available, then you don't have to do it. Rabbi Akiva says even if you could spit and you don't, it's totally fine. So we bring this comparison to show how Rabbi Akiva thinks that spitting is dispensable. It's not indispensable. You can do it. You can do without it. So therefore, spitting by itself should have no effect, and she should be able to, even if she spits at one of the brothers, she still should be able to do yibum with any of the brothers. It should be nothing. Okay, so can't be Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Elazar, hold on, Rabbi Elazar, he's the one that was more stringent with Rabbi Akiva, and he said you need both the chalitza and the taking off the shoe, and you need spitting in order for it to be valid. So these are 2 things that are necessary in order to permit the woman to go and marry. And anytime you have 2 things that are necessary, one without the other does not work. And so here, he for sure would say that if you did halisa only or spitting only, then it's invalid. then so she would be able to go ahead and marry someone else. So it can't be Rabbi Elazar either. Rather, this statement that was sent from Eretz Israel to Shemuel must be according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Ela ke Rabbi Detanya kibse aseret en mekadishin halechem ela bishchita. Now we're going to compare it to yet another case of korbanot. This time on Shavuot, we bring the 2 loaves of bread, shte halechem. And those are accompanied by 2 lambs, and they are dependent on each other. Those 2 loaves of bread, you bake them and all that. And when you bake them, they're not yet sanctified as a sacrifice. They belong to the Bet HaMikdash monetarily, but they don't yet have holiness. When do they become consecrated? Only when you do shechita on the kevasim. So when you take those lambs and mekadeshin lechem, the bread only becomes kadosh when you do shechita on the lambs. Fine. Now, kesad, there's actually 2 steps that you need to do with the lambs. Shechatan lishman v'zadaktaman lishman. So the ideal case is that you do shechita with proper intention, and you also sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach with proper intention. When you do those 2 things, then kadash alechem, the bread becomes sanctified. Now, what if you missed one? Shahat shelo lishman vezarak lishman lo kadash alechem. If you did shechita without proper intention, even though you sprinkled the blood with intention, no good, because the offerings were never the animals were never properly slaughtered. So that's it. It's no good from the beginning, and therefore that bread is not sanctified. Kohanim cannot eat it. Shechatan lishman vezaraktaman shelo lishman. But the other way around does work halfway. You did shechita for proper intention, but then when he came around to sprinkling the blood, the Kohen did not have proper intention. In that case, kadosh ve'eno kadosh tibere me'ir. Then it's only partially holy. They're consecrated to the extent that it cannot be redeemed. You see, if it only has monetary holiness, then you can redeem it with money and then eat the bread, because the holiness goes into the money. In this case, they are sanctified enough in and of themselves that you can't do redemption, but not fully, in that you cannot eat it. And that's the Rabbi, that's what Rabbi Nasi says regarding these 2 aspects that are necessary in order to redeem. Now, before we compare it to our case, we'll see that Baraita continues with disagreement. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer le'olam eno kadosh ad sheishchot ishman v'yizrok daman lishman. Realize this says you need to do both things. You have to do the shechita, the slaughtering, with proper intention, and the sprinkling also with proper intention. And if you don't do both of them with intention, then the loaves do not become kadosh at all. Okay, so what's the comparison? Just like in regarding the loaves, the lambs, if you do only the shechita properly and not the other one, even so, even though you're supposed to do both, even only doing one does have some effect. So too, ideally, in chalitza, you should do both the spitting and taking off the shoe. But what if you did only the spitting? There also, the spitting does work halfway, sufficient to make her prohibited to do yibum with any of the brothers again, but it's not sufficient for her to go and marry anybody else. So therefore, it started the process, and you have to continue and then go ahead and take off the shoe. So you see that the B is of the opinion that when you're required to do 2 things and you only do one, it still can be partially effective. And so, good, we have a source for the tradition that came from Eretz Israel to Bavel, and we'll continue tomorrow analyzing Rabbi Akiva further. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.